Did you know that 100 years ago, on the 26th of January, last week if you're watching in real time, John Logie Baird publicly demonstrated a working television system for the first time? Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, and the complicated life of a man who invented a lot more than a strange mechanical telly. This is Helensburgh, and behind me on that plinth is a bust of its most famous son. John Logie Baird was born here on the 13th of August 1888 in a house that in those days was a manse. His father was a local minister. JLB was a sickly child. He had respiratory problems and he was always cold, which isn't ideal growing up on the decidedly damp west coast of Scotland, but he showed an aptitude for engineering. He experimented with the classic tin cannon string phone that we all did, but then he jumped into setting up an actual phone exchange in his bedroom so he could talk to his friends. Then he built a generator and lit his family home. It was the only house in the town with electricity. He studied at the Glasgow and West of Scotland Technical College, doing engineering apprentice jobs at the same time. Then he went to the University of Glasgow, but his degree course was interrupted by the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, and he never went back. He wrote in his memoir that while he was at the University of Glasgow, he met John Reith, the man who would later go on to be the Director General of the BBC, a fellow student who Baird claims picked on him. The two would go on to clash again years later. He volunteered for the army in 1915, but what was then called a weak constitution meant that he was declared unfit to serve. So instead he joined the catchily named Clyde Valley Electrical Power Company. While he was there, he worked on other things in his spare time. Inspired by his own bad circulation and cold feet, he came up with the Baird undersock. Soldiers on the front line couldn't change their socks often, and the mud and moisture meant that a lot of them got trench foot, an infection that could lead to amputation. Baird made and marketed his undersock to keep feet warm and dry. He filled the socks with borax, which has antifungal properties. He was quite a quiet man, but he was very good at marketing. He employed women with sandwich boards and made a plywood model of a tank advertising his products. His side hustle went well, catching the eye of the press, and he sold so many pairs of socks that he was able to give up the day job, which was just as well because he was on the verge of being sacked. At one point, he'd shorted out part of the network in Glasgow by passing a massive current through a stick of graphite in an attempt to make diamonds. In the end, he made as much money from socks as he would have done in 12 years at the power company. When he counted it all up, he realised he had £1,600 in the bank, about £80,000 or $110,000 in today's money. And now he had another plan in mind. He was going to go to Trinidad to make jam. Part of the inspiration for his scheme was his health, but another part was romantic. He had met a woman called Alice in a library in 1917, but because of his health, he didn't feel quite eligible enough. In Trinidad, he could give his lungs a rest from the damp climate back home and use a plentiful supply of cheap fruit to make his jams. It didn't quite go according to plan though, and he arrived back in Glasgow having spent 3/4 of his funds and in worse shape than he'd left. Worse than that, when he got in touch with Alice, she'd moved on and got married. What happened next remains a bit of a mystery, but in an example of the out-of-the-box thinking and persistence that would come to define his life, he came to an arrangement whereby Alice split her time between Baird and her husband. It was an arrangement that would last until he himself got married in 1931. He moved down to London determined to pursue his fortune and invent stuff. He patented a glass razor that wouldn't rust, but it did have a habit of shattering. He invented pneumatic shoes with balloons in the soles, but they burst. Eventually, he turned his mind to TV, or as he called it, seeing by wireless. It wasn't really a new concept. Alan Campbell Swinton had suggested a system using a cathode ray tube in 1908. But that was an electronic system, something that was beyond Baird's financial resources at the time. Another solution had been proposed by Paul Gottlieb Nipkow, a German engineer. He'd patented the idea for a mechanical scanning system that utilised spinning discs, known as Nipkow discs, with differently positioned holes to scan images line by line in 1884. But no one had managed to make either solution work. In 1922, Baird's doctor advised him to leave London for his health, so he took himself off to Hastings on the coast and moved in with a friend. One afternoon he was out for a walk when an idea hit him, and he went back to the flat and assembled the stuff he needed on the cheap. He used a hat box for the discs, bicycle pump lenses, a fan motor and a tea chest. In 1923 he was able to transmit an image of a Maltese cross, but that was a silhouette. He rented rooms above a shop in Hastings for his experiments, but had to move out when he gave himself a 1,000-volt electric shock he described as twisting him up and flinging him across the premises. His landlord quickly asked him to vacate the premises after that. He kept working, refining his invention and trying to publicise it. At one point, he turned up at the offices of the Daily Express. The news editor was slightly terrified of him and asked one of his staff to go down and get rid of the lunatic who's down there. He says he's got a machine for seeing by wireless. Watch him, he may have a razor on him. He experimented on transmitting images of people, but he used a lot of light. So much light that he set someone's hair on fire and the volunteers kind of dried up, so he had to resort to using a ventriloquist dummy's head. He nicknamed Stooky Bill. In late 1925, he managed to transmit an image of Stooky Bill, and just after that, he went downstairs and persuaded a 20-year-old office worker, William Edward Tainton, to sit in front of his scanner. Tainton became the first person to be broadcast in full tonal range. Then, on the 26th of January 1926, at number 22 Frith Street, London, in front of an assembled media and members of the Royal Institute, John Logie Baird demonstrated the first working television system. There was a lot of excitement. It wasn't television as we know it, and ultimately Baird's mechanical televisor lost out to an electronic system from EMI Marconi. But he was the first person to demonstrate that it could be done, and where he went, others followed. In 1928, he was the first person to broadcast TV across the Atlantic, sending a signal by shortwave radio from London to New York. The BBC, however, didn't want him to use their equipment to broadcast TV, seeing it as a gimmick. He kept on refining and inventing, coming up with phonovision, an early way of recording pictures on wax discs. The noctivisor, an early way of seeing by infrared. He even came up with a high-definition electronic stereoscopic 3D TV in 1946. That same year though, he suffered a stroke, and on the 14th of June, he died in Bexhill-on-Sea. He was 57. He was an amazing inventor, but the business side of things never really worked out for him, and he died leaving very little money behind. He might not have invented the version of TV that took off, but he was the first to show it could be done, and like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile, once he'd proved it could be done, people caught up quickly. In a country known for engineering, innovation and invention, John Logie Baird's name still stands out. In 1969, when NASA landed men on the moon, modern electronic cameras were too big and unwieldy, so it was a system based on one developed by Baird that sent live colour images back to Earth. I wonder what he'd have made of that.